Good morning, everybody. We're going to be talking about a few things today. One is we're going to be talking about how to close deals. And my guest today works in the moving industry, and his company books appointments for organizations in the moving industry. So he's going to give us all his tips and tricks on how to qualify and close business in that space. But I do know that a lot of what he talks about is actually going to apply to a lot of other companies as well. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk a little bit about the Ukraine because that's where he's from and maybe get his opinion about what's happening over in the Middle East as well. So we're going to cover a lot of territory. His name is Yuriy Margolin. Before we started recording, I was actually wondering how to say his name. And when he sent me a message saying put the accent the emphasis on the O. So it's not Margolin, it's Margolin. And I appreciate
Yep.
him doing that. So Yuriy is the CEO and owner of a company called Moving Sales Professionals. He's also the host of a podcast called Let's Talk Moving. I was on his show last week. He's on my show this week. We had a good time. Listen if you haven't. And I look forward to getting this thing going with you, Yuriy. So thanks for being on.
No, no problem. Thank you for having me.
You get it. All right. So real quick, tell me about you're a guy who has worked ever since you came to this country. You came here with your
Absolutely.
parents in 1994, you came?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
11, I was 11 years old at the time. So I've been here for a while, almost 30 years. So this next year, 2024, is going to be 30 years in US.
Okay. And informally, that was your first experience in the moving business, right? You made $5 putting stuff in
Oh
the
yeah. Yeah. It's funny actually. I think I realized that for the first time probably, 20 episodes ago on my podcast when I was talking. I'm like, wow, I didn't even think about that was actually my first foray into the moving industry. But yeah, I was 11 years old. Then it was 1994. We were probably here month at the most. It was summer. We moved to US. It was like early June, June 4th of 1994. And our next door neighbors, I mean, we had an apartment, so our next door neighbors were moving stuff into a truck. I was 11. I had nothing to do. I didn't know anybody. I didn't really have any friends yet, so I had nothing to do. So I, started helping them out, putting some boxes and things on the truck, and they gave me $5 or something like that. I don't even remember exactly what it was, but it was somewhere probably around $5. And then we ended up talking about where I was from with the limited English that I had, which was extremely limited at the time because I only knew maybe 10 words. So somehow we were, or rather, we were able to communicate. And I was shocked because in 1994, they had no idea that Soviet Union split up. They had no idea that there was such a country called Ukraine. Yeah, it was mind-boggling because at that age, when I went to school in Ukraine, you have a general understanding of world geography to a degree. So
Mhm.
you know where things are. You may not know every state in the United States, but you know that Washington, D.C. is the capital. You've certainly heard of the city of New York. You've certainly heard of some of the bigger ones like Los Angeles or whatever, right? You've heard of Miami, but like you certainly would know things like that. So for somebody in 1994 not to know that Union no longer exists was very surprising.
Yeah, what was it like coming? I want to talk about moving, but now that you got me on this topic, I want to dive in a little bit. What was it
Sure.
like coming to the States at that age, not really having command of the English language yet? I know your dad, your parents were, and one was an engineer, one was a cartoon artist. For whatever reason,
Right.
they decided to come here. And
Right.
were you an only child, or do you have siblings as well?
No, I do have I have a two older sisters, half sisters, one from my dad's side, one from my mom's side.
Okay. Did you want to come, or were you told, "Hey, we're going
I,
here"?
I
How did that work?
I was 11. It's not like I was given the choice, really. I know for a long time my parents were actually trying to decide whether to go to Israel or whether to go to US. We had relatives in both places, so that was the final decision was US. And I think the decision for that was because my parents, thinking ahead, did not want me to go into the army when I grow up
Yeah.
and they wanted me to have that, I guess, have that choice. Ironically enough, I almost ended up going into the army, being in US as a little bit older when I was in my like early 20s. I was talking to recruiters. I was thinking about it because I had no direction at that point. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life.
That's
So
interesting. Two hotbeds right now. You get you all
right.
the stuff
Yeah,
going on
I'm
in Ukraine.
definitely in between. I have friends and family in both locations. So yes, I'm definitely intertwined with both conflicts right now, and I'm feverishly listening to the news. I mean, I'm more so focused on Ukraine and Israel, to be honest with you, but yeah, I mean, it's both things are ridiculous. So, in from my standpoint, but coming to this country, we had nothing. We came as immigrants at the time before, like during Soviet Union, before what we know Ukraine is today. It was a completely different world. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in Soviet Union and at the time, and certainly, my parts of my family experienced it. But I can tell you, from those of you that listen to some of the things that's been coming out of Russia, it's completely different today.
In what way?
All these people talk about, Nazis in Ukraine and stuff like that. First of all, you got to realize one thing. Americans or Europeans, anybody that's listening to this podcast that are in those parts of the world, you got to realize one specific thing about Ukraine. If you read up Ukraine history, it was Kievan Rus. If we go back to like the creation before Russia became Russia and all that stuff, way back, going back to Peter and what have you, right? It did not start with Moscow. And then St. Petersburg was the capital of Russia. And then got moved to Moscow, if I remember correctly, my history. Ukraine was already there. Kiev was already there. It's an old, old city. And Ukraine has always, always fought for its independence. When you talk about Ukrainian nationalists, when it was part of the Soviet Union, it was presented as a bad thing, right? But looking at the current situation now and the things that we were taught when we were in school in Soviet Union and what have you, you realize that they were nationalist in the sense that they were pro-Ukraine and against everybody else. During those wars, they fought against the Poles, they fought against the Hungarians, they fought against the Russians, they fought against the Germans, they fought against anybody that was trying to invade their land. It was always about that. My primary language, as somebody that's actually from the city of Kiev, that's not from the outskirts, that lived in the middle of the city. I lived like 20 minutes from the train station in Kiev. It's right in the middle of the city. It's different. I mean, it's a beautiful city. It's lots of churches. It's gorgeous. But speaking Russian as my primary language, yeah, I learned Ukrainian. I had Ukrainian language in school. I had the history of Ukraine. But they had different types of schools back then, right? So they had schools that were everything was taught mainly in Russian, and then you had Ukrainian language that was in Ukrainian, Ukrainian history that was in Ukrainian, literature that might have been in Ukrainian, right? And then you had all Ukrainian schools where everything was taught in Ukrainian. So for me, math was taught in Russian, Russian history, Russian literature, everything was taught in Russian except for the history of Ukraine, except for Ukrainian language. So those were in Ukrainian. So I do know Ukrainian. I do speak Ukrainian well. But when I do speak Ukrainian to somebody from Lviv, for example, which is a more focused Ukrainian speaking city, they're going to know that my first language is Russian.
Let me ask you this, Yuri. When you came here,
Mhm.
were you welcomed? You remember?
It's hard as a child because children are mean in general. So in my case, the reason my English is what it is today, when I came, so we came to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was the city that we came to. There was some relatives there. That's how we ended up in the city in the first place. I mean, it's a long story. It was actually my one of my sister's dads immigrated years ago, and we came through him. Came to Pittsburgh. I went to Frick International. It was middle school at the time. It was focused on languages, so it had like French. I think it had Japanese, German, Italian. So it had some of the languages that are not common to a lot of schools today. Today it's what? Spanish, maybe French. There's not as much variety. There was more variety there. That summer, I went to a camp that was configured with that school. It was specifically for international students and it focused on English. So all summer long, besides all the activities that they had at school, it was focused on English, 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 nonstop, right? And then when the school year started, uh, regular American students had English, regular English, plus they had their language that they were learning. Instead of language and instead of regular English, we had ESL. So
Hmm.
we were learning English. Then after sixth grade, camp again, school year again. After seventh grade, my parents actually got me a tutor. I learned Spanish over the summer as much as it was possible. I took a test before the eighth grade year, passed it. So, eighth grade, I went to a regular class, just like Americans that lived here their entire life. But yeah, there were issues. I mean, kids are mean, like I said. So I've gotten into fights over being called a Russian pig, even though I was never Russian. But yes, that's things like that happen. And it happens, it's like I said, kids are mean. You don't know what the parents are saying at home. You don't know, especially when you have your own children, you don't know what conversations are taking place. Who knows? I mean, a lot of people in this country are against immigrants. Like right now, you have this big fight on Capitol Hill about funding Ukraine, right? And I'm going to get back to that later at some point. But they got this big fight on Capitol Hill about funding Ukraine. And their Republicans are trying to tie that to the border crossing. And all these people are going to say, yeah, we don't want them to take our jobs. A lot of the jobs that these migrants are taking are the jobs that, frankly, 99% of Americans don't want to do. How many people want to pick in the fields under a blistering sun? How many want to dig ditches? How many want to do these seasonal jobs? They don't. And they certainly don't want to pay what these guys are getting paid. Let's be honest about that. So if you close these borders, who's going to do that work? These farmers and all these fields and all that stuff. Look, we enjoy all this beautiful produce year round, right? We get strawberries in winter, right? We get all sorts of fruit from all over America because of different climates, right? But you do realize who's picking that fruit, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's those migrants. As those migrants are not making $15, $16, whatever the hour minimum age is today. They're not making that. They're making a heck of a lot lower than that. So all those farmers that are making money today, if they had to pay minimum wage to American workers, they would go out of business. They would not be doing this. At the end of the day, if this happens, who is going to lose out? The American people. You can talk about jobs. They're not taking the high paying, quality, professional jobs. They're not taking those jobs because they barely speak English. They wouldn't get those jobs even if they wanted to.
So I think about our restaurants, I think about our, landscapers, I think about,
Yeah.
farming, all the stuff you're talking about. So for years, the back rooms in restaurants or
Mhm.
or the lawns in the neighborhoods and all that have been being taken care of by immigrant workers under
Mhm.
the table, et cetera, et cetera, et
Sure.
cetera. And you're right. And a lot of it is because the Americans won't do that work for that money. And so I totally get that. And we can go back and forth as
Right.
to,
It's
right.
reality. I can understand one thing, like commission across my industry, right? If you're doing call center stuff, right? Most moving companies are paying their sales reps, let's say somewhere in a 6 to 10% range, if it's commission only, somewhere in that range.
Yep.
If they were to go and take a call center outside of the country, if they would go to India, if they would go to Emirates, if they would go to Mexico, you're talking somewhere between like Emirates. I know because I talked to somebody there recently who was trying to get us to do some potentially work for them. He wants to pay those poor salespeople 2 to 3%. You're talking a quarter or what you would have to pay an American worker to do the same job. My workers are right now 100% US. Every single one of my employees, they are here in US. They're based in Maryland. For those of you that are wondering, once again, I'm in the States for 30 years. I am a U.S. citizen. I've been a U.S. citizen since year 2000, I believe. So, I've been in this country for a very long time. I pay taxes. I do everything that I'm supposed to do. And most people that come to this country from other countries, eh, and I'm not saying that there's not an exception, but most people, when they come here for a better life. That's the whole core of America. It's the whole core of American dream. We are a country of immigrants. This is what makes this country great versus what some other people say.
Do you think in some ways your upbringing and maybe maybe some of the difficulty as you transitioned into this country, or maybe some of the experiences you had over in Ukraine have actually been to your advantage? Is
I
that
mean, absolutely, I've always had a drive to succeed at something, but the reality is this. I've had a lot of like I haven't had it easy. We came to this country. We had no money. We never had a car prior to coming to US. So we came here. My parents were working on jobs. Yes, for a while they were getting welfare and government support and stuff like that. But as soon I was so proud of myself when I didn't have to take a government subsidy finally. When I was old enough to have to hold my own job, and my parents didn't have to. I mean, they're older today, so obviously there was like SSI, retired, all that stuff, right? But like we were all proud of being, not living with that at some point. It was like it was something that I had a dream as a kid, and I didn't have much, honestly. I didn't have a single brand piece of clothing until I went to college.
wow? Yeah,
I got my college degree. I paid my own way through. My parents didn't have any money. They didn't pay for my college. They didn't pay for my books. I was on school lunch during when I went to school. We really didn't have much. Our first car was like a 1980 or something like that. Ford Taurus. No, not even that. Ford Tempo, I think. That was our first car.
yeah, yeah.
Ages ago, it seems, right today, right?
Right. Well, that's
So
why I'm kind of thinking, and I use the word advantage, but it's kind of in quotes because you had to work through a lot of crap.
I mean, besides doing what I said with helping the next door neighbors move, I somehow managed to strike a deal with the garbage truck drivers in the neighborhood. I would jump on their truck every Tuesday or Thursday, whatever the pickup day was. I forget what it was now, but I
Yeah,
would physically jump on their truck. I would ride around the neighborhood with them, and I would help them pick up trash. And at the end of that morning, they would give me like 2 to 3 to 5 bucks sometimes.
yeah,
They would basically give me that tip, and that was me earning money for myself. So I fall time, I'd go and I'd rake leaves.
yeah,
Winter time, I'd go and collect snow. That first winter, 1994, 95 winter, I made $100 that winter shoveling snow.
yeah,
That was like my parents were in shock.
yeah.
So I did all that. I passed flyers around for a Chinese restaurant. That didn't last very long because my friend didn't really want to do that. He was being lazy. It was the two of us. I mean, we were doing it for food in the first place because we like Chinese food. And we were like probably 12, 13 maybe at the time. I sold movie tickets at a movie theater. We weren't getting paid much. It was like, I think it was like $8 an hour, or maybe I don't even know remember what the minimum wage was. Maybe it was $5 an hour. I can't remember.
Probably $6 an hour. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
around that. Well, yeah, it was very, very low. For the movie theater, it was super low, like like
sure.
like the bare minimum, whatever it was at the time. So 5.15, I don't even know.
Yeah.
So I've done that. I worked at Burger King for a minute. I got kicked out of that because I don't even remember why I got fired, but that was a long time ago. I've done all those odd jobs and just whatever, just trying to get through things, right? Meanwhile, like I played hockey. I started playing hockey when I was 12, so I did that a lot. I did theater since I was 12 because I used to sing in the choir when I was in Ukraine, and I sang in the choir when I went to middle school and all that. So I've done that throughout the time. Done a bunch of local shows, the Jewish community shows in Pittsburgh, and done a bunch of those. And then in 2000, I believe it was 2000. So I was like 17 at the time, I believe, or right around 18.
Mhm.
I got my first sales job. So I found this job. It was a call center. It was this little uh it's very similar. Actually, I think my office looks a lot better than that one did. But that one was a little, I don't even know if it was bigger. It was about the same size. It felt very cramped. But anyway, it was this wonderful guy, Jay Fairbrother. He hired me. He had this call center. We did fundraising for nonprofits. So we did fundraising for companies like Sierra Club, Smithsonian, Kennedy Center, Whitman Walker Clinic, Habitat for Humanity. I can go on and on and on. There's, International Rescue Committee. We did it for all these. We did the Heritage Foundation, even though I'm not a huge fan of that. But we did a lot of democratic charities. I mean, this was back like one of the chair things we did fundraising for was going back to we did fundraising for our Dean campaign. I always like to tell this story just about sales in general So we were doing calls for Howard Dean campaign. We're down to asking people to contribute $10 a month. So I'm talking to this lady in her 80s, and I'm like, ma'am, you probably spend more than that on your dog food or your cat food in a week. Yes, sir, but my cat cuddles with me. Well, ma'am, if I could send a few good Democrats over your house right now, I'd do it. Now you're talking. At that point, we're both laughing, and she's like, you're a good salesman. I'll do it. So yeah, that's my favorite story about fundraising.
Let me ask you that. I'm sorry to
Sure.
interrupt you, but like
No, it's
what's
fine.
interesting about what you're telling me is a lot of the stuff that you've done over the course of your life is work that a lot of people would rather not do, whether it's, shoveling, raking, cleaning
Mhm.
up, moving, and now you're in the business of fielding calls and booking appointments to hopefully close business. And
Mhm.
so the reality is this, I've trained and developed a ton of sales organizations over the years. And the biggest problem they really have is on that very first call. And you have a whole business doing stuff that
Mhm.
most companies don't want to do. They don't want
Mhm.
to vet the work. They don't want to qualify or disqualify the work. Getting the appointment is the hardest thing to do. And your organization exists so that these
Mhm.
moving entities can actually generate revenue. Tell me why you're doing this work. Like what causes you to want to do it? Who buys from you? I'll ask you a million other questions, but just tell
Yeah,
me.
that's fine. Well, for the longest time, like I was doing fundraising, I walked in, I never done sales before. About 3 to 4, maybe 5 months later, I was teaching people that were twice my age how to sell. I just had that natural knack in me to do it. And I think that's part of it. But I did that probably the call center stuff, probably good 3 to 5 years of my life. I spent doing that type of stuff. I did that in Pittsburgh. Then I was in Los Angeles for a little bit, working for a different call center. I was there for theater school and stuff like that. So I did that. That's where I actually started. 2003 is actually when I started working for my first moving company as a sales rep. I
Mhm,
did that. And then in 2000, at some point into between 2009 and 2010, actually beginning of 2010, I lost my job. I was a contractor, so I did not want to go back to flipping burgers. So about 8 months I was, hung up and dry. I could not find work.
mhm,
And then I went to an interview, and the moment I got there, I saw trucks sitting outside, and I'm like, oh, I know this.
mhm,
And from that on, that was 2010. From that on, I've been doing moving nonstop, which brings us to today. So if you asked me 10 years ago about sales, my response would have been, I hate sales, but I'm very good at it. That would have been my response. Today, I cannot say that. I can say that I love what I do. So the way that I got to the current situation, so all the entire time I worked for a bunch of moving companies, I did very, very well for myself. But sooner or later, I'd find myself knocking my head against the ceiling where they didn't want to pay me any more money, but they wanted me to do more and more things. My responsibilities were growing, but my money wasn't.
mhm,
So I had to move on from one place to another in an attempt to increase my earning potential, right? And then one day at that time, I was doing sales for probably 3 different companies at the same time. And one of the bosses, it's that original company actually that hired me.
mhm,
Um, so he made a joke about it. He said, "Hey, Yuri, you could be selling for 10 different moving companies. You'd make a fortune." And after we laughed about it, we hung up. And then after we hung up, I sat there for a second and I thought, well, I can't sell for 10 different moving companies. But if I got a couple of people, and then I started, okay, well, what can I do? Because I know that the profit margin is slim, right? I've been in the industry for such a long time. I've done everything except jumping on a semi. So I've done all of that stuff. I've been on a truck. I've done sales. I've done operation. I've done dispatch. I've done all of that stuff. So I know, being as long in the industry as I have been, I know everything I need to know about the industry. Everything, the leads, the operation, the office stuff. I know all of it, right? Except, like I said, physically driving a semi.
mhm,
So where can I cut cost so that this would work? So I looked at one thing, like for example, we don't have merchant service. So all the deposits are being charged directly through moving companies. That was a huge saving. So I had a few others. I'm not going to disclose all of them, but there was other things that I found that were ways for me to save money. So, I was originally not going to open until beginning of 2019, but then in 2018, this guy that I used to work with, I used to be a foreman for one of the companies that I worked with, he reached out to me and he said, "Hey, I want you to do some sales for me. And I said, well, I'm actually trying to open up my own call center right now. And before you know it, we had things wrapped up and we had things going, and we ended up opening in October of 2018. We opened up Moving Sales Professionals, and the rest is history, as they say. So the goal of the company was always from day one to bring professional sales into the moving industry. So I took that call center experience that I had and I brought it into the moving industry. So I took, I mean, honestly, I've tried to hire people that had moving company experience. It ended up crashing and burning badly. I don't have a single person except myself that works here that has a moving company background. Not one.
What went
So
wrong? Like what went wrong
the
with those?
problem is bad habits. So my goal was always, first of all, I wanted to be professional. Second of all, I wanted to be accurate. I never wanted to be in a position where we don't get enough information, where we put customer in a position where they feel like they've been lied to. We put the company in a position where they feel like the job is a lot bigger or they have to deal with some things that they weren't expected. We put the movers that are they're physically doing the job that have to do all the labor work in a position where suddenly they have to do a lot more, and the guys are exhausted. I mean, it's hard work. The physical aspect of moving is very difficult.
Mhm.
It's very hard, and I've done it myself, so I know. So I always kept the movers themselves on the day of the job in mind as well when I was thinking about this type of stuff, right?
Do you ever have one of the biggest challenges in the space is labor
Hmm.
and truck drivers and the folks that are actually moving the product on and off the
Sure.
trucks. Do you ever have to turn down business because your client doesn't have the crew?
We don't have that issue. The reason we don't have that issue is because every contract that we schedule, we have access to the calendar. We know how many trucks they have. So we're not going to overbook. We're not going to book more than they tell us they have availability for. And if something happens, if a truck breaks down or something like that, they're supposed to call us and tell us, hey, we only have one truck for now until this truck is in the shop, for
Got it.
example, or something
Oh,
like that. So we would stay away from that. We want to, once again, our goal is accuracy. We're not done at the point of sale, unlike a lot of our or all of our competitors, really. So we're still talking to the clients leading into the move. If on the day of the move, the customer has more items to be moved, I want my sales rep to know about that book the job, and I want my sales rep to call the customer because when that happens, it's going to be a very simple conversation. David, you gave me all your items. You told me what you were moving. Where did that extra 500 boxes come from? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot about a storage. Well, David, you have two options. Option number one, we move the items that are on your inventory only, in which case you're going to roughly pay what we estimated. Or option number two, we move everything, but now of course, your price is going to change because you have more things to move. Now it's going to take more time, or maybe it's going to weigh more, or maybe it's going to take up more space in the truck, depending on how you quote. If it's a long distance move, it's a local move, whatever. We're doing the whole process. We're taking inventory, we're
yep.
getting all the information, we're following up, we're booking the job. We're not, well, like I said, we're not done. We're still calling them. If their move is 3 months out, we're still calling them 3 months out unless they book.
What do you expect from your clients in advance of taking them on?
Well, first of all, we do not, and it's very specific, and it's coming once again from my sales background. I want a product I can sell. I will not work with anybody that's not licensed movers. We
Yep.
only move with movers that have good ratings and good reviews. So, for example, we use Safer Web, which is a short version of CSA website, the government website for the DOT. So we look up to see if you're licensed.
Yeah.
We check out the Better Business Bureau to see if it doesn't as much. I mean, it's great if you're accredited, but we
Hmm.
more so look at your ratings. Are you answering your reviews? Are you taking care of your customer?
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, I care about my brand.
Yep.
At the end of the day, I want you to care about yours. I don't want you to be one of those companies that's going to change their name 3 times because you don't do good business. I don't want to waste my salespeople's time. I don't want to mistreat your customers. And I want to make sure that, and I put these things on the table immediately. I want to be 100% transparent about how we do things, why we do things.
And do your customers find you or do you find them?
It's both. I mean, We launched our podcast in January of last year, so we're coming up on 50th episode this Monday. So we're going to be here at the 52 episodes very shortly. So that's been helping a lot. And in that space, the goal is not to be salesy at all.
Hmm.
The goal is to provide education. The goal is to talk to industry professionals or business professionals like yourself, for example. Obviously, we had you recently, but the goal is we had some people that companies that have been in business for a very long time. We work with UK, we work with Canada and US. So we've had professionals in Canada on the podcast. We had professionals in UK on the podcast. A lot of really great guys, a lot of really really strong people that have been in the industry for a very, very long time that are respected voices. I mean, one of my favorite people is Ed Katz with the office moving. He's amazing and he's extremely nice guy to boot that helps out. And then we recently had a guy that does the uh, he does like floor protection. He's amazing. Like Henry Masuda, he's from Japan, and his materials are being used not just to move in the industry, but it's being used in like rigs and all sorts of things, applications for his product all over the United States. So and the world in general. So that you have some people that really have knowledge to bring to the table that really have great things that they do. It's really amazing.
Two questions on your own people. How do you find your own people? And then two, how do you train them?
So I'm looking for, well, in the perfect world, I would be looking to hire somebody that has potentially that has zero experience, but has the same attributes that I had when I started.
Which
Because
which
then I can grow that person, I can groom that person to be what I want him or her to be. That would be in the perfect world, right?
what are those non-negotiable attributes though?
But
You know what they
I
are.
mean, you have to have a knack of sales. So a lot of people make a mistake of assuming, and this happens a lot in the moving industry because a lot of moving industry owners, they're coming off a truck. They're used to be foremen. So they don't really know sales. So they make an assumption that just because they hired a customer service person, that customer service person is going to be able to do sales. And don't get me wrong, some people are able to transition from being customer service to being sales. But here's the big difference. If you're if I'm asking you about that, about like if I'm talking to an interviewee, my favorite question. So here you go, guys. I'm giving you a industry insider tip, right? How do you know if the person is a salesperson, if the person's a customer service person, right? My favorite question is, so you just called me, right? You're a sales rep. I'm the person that's looking to move. And I just told you I already booked somebody. What are your next steps? A customer service person is going to say, oh, no problem. Have a nice day. Please keep us in mind for next time. Call us back whenever you're ready. If you need any help, let us know.
Yeah.
Right? That's a customer service person. A
Yeah.
salesperson is going to say, oh, really? Well, what are they offering you? What is it that you were looking for? Did you check out their ratings? Are they sufficient for you? Did you look at their license? Are they licensed? What are they charging? Maybe we can be better of service. Did they get your inventory? Do they know everything about your move to be able to quote you accurately?
Hmm.
Salesperson is going to ask questions because here's why. I just told you I'm already booked, right? And in the customer service world, that's done. It's over with at that point, right? But in sales world and in somebody in my position, I've been doing this for as many years as I have, that means absolutely nothing to me
Yeah.
because that comment can mean a variety of things. It can mean I got three quotes, I look at them, and I'm considering which one I should call back.
Hmm.
It could mean that, yes, in fact, I did book one company, but now I actually got three more quotes. And those quotes are significantly lower or significantly higher than what I booked with. And now I'm worried that I made a bad decision. So now I'm having buyer's remorse because I have no idea. Like now I'm really like, I don't know. I'm uneasy. I'm not sure. Right. Or it could be that maybe I did talk to somebody, but I haven't called him back yet. Either way, you won't know if you have an opening if you don't ask the questions.
You reminding me of a guy I know in the space. I used to do a fair amount of work with him, and he had to go into a house. He wasn't an appointments. He didn't book them from your end. He was the internal sales
Mhm,
guy. And he showed up at this house at 5 o'clock on a Friday night, and
mhm,
the homeowner had six quotes on her kitchen table.
mhm,
She wanted him to provide the seventh.
mhm,
And it was such a classic way to respond. He said, "So here's the deal." He said, "It sounds like you've got plenty to choose from. We're not going to add to that. If we were to, it's going to be more expensive than anything there. Let me see who you've used. Well, let me see who you've gotten a quote from." He basically said, "This is the one you should go with. It
mhm,
is the most expensive, but here's why. They're a great company. Go with them."
mhm,
She says, "Well, wait a minute. Why are you saying this?" And goes back and forth with him. He walked out with the deal. Not only did he walk out with the deal, he was more
mhm,
expensive even than the quote he
mhm.
recommended.
This business is so much about creating connection. So realistically, anytime I hear somebody talking about AI and how it's going to be able to, automatically create it, it's wonderful that that stuff is there.
Mhm.
But to me, it still can't beat out the personal connection.
So real quick, and I
Mhm.
want to be respectful of your time. What's the
Sure.
future of the moving business looking like?
Well, right now it's a tough time. I'll be honest with you. It's a tough time. We got two things that are happening right now. Obviously, right now is the slow season. This is the time when things slow down every year for every moving company. Usually, the companies that are in better climates, they do better. They have more, it's a little steadier. For those of us that have snow and the elements, it affects us quite a bit. And people usually wait till springtime, summertime to move. That's the busy season for everybody,
Mhm.
right? That's one thing. The other thing, we got an issue of the current housing market. So people, frankly, not having as much money to go around because of what's going on with the economy,
Mhm.
right? So they're not moving as much right now. So until that stuff starts rebounding, we're not, I mean, we'll see an increase once we get into spring and summer because we always do. But it's not going to be as much as years past unless something changes with the housing market, unless the interest rates go down. We're not going to see that as a big thing. So to me, the biggest thing that needs to be done today, social media is the frontier. So if there's a question that I can answer, I always check my LinkedIn. I always check my Facebook. I always check all these things. You guys can like us and subscribe to us on our podcast on YouTube, where you'll have all those links, David. So you can always subscribe to all those things. You can always check out our Instagram. You can always check out our TikTok. So
Yeah.
most of our fan base and people that listen to our things are going to be people that are business professionals or professionals that are in the moving industry or affiliated with moving industry.
You've got an old school mentality to you. And I don't know if it's because you're from Ukraine or you worked your way up.
Probably
I don't know what it is, but you've got an
both.
old school mentality, but you've got a new school way or approach to business and sales. You're very focused on phone work and the hard work it takes on navigating a phone conversation with a stranger. But you've completely adopted the social media, the podcasting, all that stuff, which by the way, I have as well. And, in the training that I do, I try to cover all of this with people because it's no longer just bang the phone's business. Can you
No.
comment on that?
Well, I'm going to comment on a couple of things. So some moving company owners, they think that if the people in their sales office are at each other's throat, that that's a good thing. No, it's not. I've been in those offices. That's the worst thing that you can do because what that creates distrust in your company from within. That creates animosity of your workers towards each other, where they feel like they constantly have to watch their back instead of focusing on their primary job, which is booking jobs.
That's so true.
So it creates a completely opposite effect. So if you think it's great that they're at each other's throat, no, it's not. It's doing the opposite. And honestly, good professional salespeople are not going to deal with that. They're going to walk away. I mean, then that's company culture. So that's extremely important. That's something that I'm very, very high on in my business is that I want to make sure that everybody backs each other up, that everybody helps each other, because there's going to be a situation where you may need to be on vacation or maybe you're sick that you need somebody to cover for you. And if you have this animosity and you can't trust your coworkers, it's going to create stress. It's going to create uneasiness. It's going to create some things that are not positive, right? The other part too, some moving company owners, when it comes to sales and call center stuff, they think that if a customer cussed you out, that means you're doing a great job in terms of follow-ups if you're getting cussed out at least once a day. Wrong. So I don't want to get to a point where people are cussing me out. If they cussed you out, same exact conversations happen. They're going to say, there was this company, they were inundating me, they were just completely like ignoring. I told them to take me off the list. They would not take me off the list. I had to cuss them out. Right now, you just created, not only is this person never going to use you, you just got those family and those friends that are never going to use you either.
I've taken up more time than you actually allocated, so I want to be respectful of that.
You did want to talk about Ukraine and Israel and all that stuff. So I'll throw a couple of sentences in that direction.
Okay.
So I'm not, look, I'll be honest with you. I'm not a huge fan of Netanyahu. I do support Israel. I do believe that they have the right to defend themselves. I do believe that if somebody's throwing rockets in you all the time, sooner or later you're going to retaliate and you want it to stop. At the same time, what people often don't realize, you have Palestinians that are living in that territory. Just because Israeli army said tomorrow or in 24 hours or in 48 hours, we're going to launch rockets in this part of Palestine, right? That doesn't mean that those people can get out of there. They're poor people. They have to live with Hamas being in charge. Anybody that gets accused of potentially spying for US or for Israel, they get dragged through the streets and they die. Okay? So the question is this. If you're a Palestinian, put yourself in their shoes for 1 second. And once again, this is somebody that's talking that's pro-Israel, right? If you put yourself in their shoes for 1 second, right? You got to realize that, okay, I know that an Israeli soldier or an American soldier is not going to go and torture and murder my family if I shoot at them. They'll kill me, yeah, but they're not going to go and torture and murder my family, right? But I know that a Hamas guy, he will go murder and torture my family if I don't shoot at the American soldier. What choice do they have, really? Now, I'm not saying it's great. And keep in mind, a lot of people want to say, oh, they elected Hamas. Okay, it's kind of hard to elect somebody when they got a gun, or not to elect somebody when they got a gun on your face and they have a machine gun that's facing your family, when you got two, three kids and a wife that's standing behind you that are afraid for their life. Who are you going to vote for? The gun or them being dead? Do you have a choice? No. Do people in Russia right now, getting back to that subject, do they have a choice in this election that's coming up? It's going to be a sham where 80%, when Putin is going to get another 80% of the vote. Again, what's the reality? Which you got to understand, what people don't understand. They talk about sanctions and things like that. Look, St. Petersburg and Moscow is not Russia, first of all. You got big cities with big incomes of oligarchs with lots and lots of money, right? And then you got the rest of the country. You go 50 kilometers outside of these big cities, big centers, right? They got nothing. Okay. They don't have paved streets. They don't have running water or electricity. They have these wooden structures from Soviet era that have, frankly, crap floating underneath the wooden floors. This is how they live. They don't have, a lot of them don't have access to the internet. They're not able to see what's going on in the world and the fact that Russia, that everybody's against what's going on there right now. They can't see this information. All they see is channel one, right? Where Putin is talking and they're talking about Nazis in Ukraine, etc., etc., etc. Meanwhile, Ukrainians, keep in mind, all those areas that right now are under their occupation, like Mariupol and some of the other cities, they're primarily Russian-speaking areas. So if those areas were so discriminated against by the Ukrainian majority, by the junta in Kiev, where Jew is in charge, by the way. That would have never happened if there's a Nazi regime, by the way. If that's the case, if that's what's happening, why are those primarily Russian speaking areas fighting against the Russians that are supposedly coming in to liberate them? This goes back to what I said in the beginning of our conversation about Ukrainians always fighting for their freedom and their independence. It did not matter against who. So the moment that the Russian troops crossed that border, they crossed the line with those primarily Russian-speaking Ukrainian population. Look, Ukraine is Ukraine. Sooner or later, Ukrainian would have been the primary language, just like English is in the United States. But that doesn't mean that half the country still wouldn't speak Russian. I do. I speak Russian. I speak Ukrainian. I speak Russian better than I speak Ukrainian. But I've never had any issues with the fact that I spoke Russian. Yeah, it's been a while since I've been in Kiev. Last time I've been to Kiev was 2011. But 2011, I got stopped in the middle of a subway station and asked directions how to get somewhere. I felt like I never left. I felt at home when I was there. And it does not matter that my primary language is Russian. The Russians in Ukraine, most of them understand Ukrainian. There's a lot of Russians that moved there. They may not speak Ukrainian, but they understand. But Russians invading, they do not understand Ukrainian.
Hmm.
And all Ukrainians understand Russian.
And you mentioned this to me the first time we talked. A lot of the Russians coming into Ukraine are not from the major cities. They're from the rural.
Yeah, because they have nothing. So the sanctions don't affect them because the sanction affect things that they already don't have. So for them, this war or whatever else, it's not, they looked at it as an opportunity to potentially earn money and potentially bring something back to their families that their families don't have. The families are dirt poor. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, so Russia has a lot of different nationalities within its borders. Russia, Tsar Russia or Soviet Union or Russia today, they've always used their minorities in these conflicts. A lot of people that are dying in these wars, those animals that went to Bucha and did in Bucha what they did in Bucha, a lot of those were from Buryatia, which is part of Russia, which back in Tsar times, that's where political prisoners were sent to work in work camps during the Tsar Russia because those areas were the areas that, I mean, there were a lot of people there that, like today it's different, but back then there was a lot of those people didn't even speak Russian. There was a lot of people that were in those parts of the country that a lot of them that were close to China, they spoke Chinese better than they spoke Russian at times. So you have all these different nationalities, all these different ethnic groups that frankly, Russia by itself, and I don't care if anybody crucifies me for this, it's been very racist towards anybody that they don't deem to be an ethnic Russian. They claim that Ukraine is Nazist. Well, they should look in the mirror. If they were to choose between those minorities and somebody that they would consider ethnically Russian, who do you think is going to get preferential treatment? And I'm not saying that there's not good people in Russia. Please understand. There's good and bad people everywhere. Russia, Palestine, Ukraine, Israel. There's bad, good and bad people everywhere. But if they had a choice between an ethnic Russian and a minority, they would choose an ethnic Russian to live. That's what we're dealing. That's what we're dealing with today in this whole conflict. And Ukrainians, we don't need Russia. We don't need what they have. Ukraine is the one country out of all the Soviet Unions that had its own resources. What happened during the Soviet Union, right? The centralized government, which was Moscow, would get everything. They would get the grain from Ukraine. They would get the oil from the Caucasus. They would get all the good things from the whole entire country. So that area was always affluent because of it, because they got all the stuff, right? Regular people, they didn't even know what they were missing, right? They lived great. They thought it was great. That's why all these people start thinking about Soviet Union again. You know, they have like this nostalgia, especially the older generation. But the reality is that they didn't know what they couldn't have. Take athletes, for example, right? They went to represent Mother Russia or Soviet Union, right? They didn't even know how much they could have because because Soviet Union, all that money that those athletes that the countries made from Olympics and world events and what have you, sporting events, that went into the country. But it was nothing in comparison to what they should have had. Same thing with scientists and historians and whatever, just people that did all those things that everybody go, what I mean, what is Russia going to be remembered for today? It used to be remembered for its literature, for Turgenev, for Pushkin, for some of the other ones that people know worldwide, Anna Karenina, etc. Right? People that read all that stuff, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, right? Those names that a lot of Americans know. I'm not mentioning somebody. What are they going to be remembered for now? They're going to be remembered for their culture. They're going to be remembered for their literature. They're going to be remembered for their scientific exploits. They're going to be remembered for historical things. No, they're going to be remembered for Bucha. They're going to be remembered for tortured Ukrainians. This whole generation, this Putin destroyed what was Russian history. He destroyed what was its culture and its legacy. What legacy do they have now? Nobody's going to remember that stuff in 20 years. They're going to remember this war now. And that's a shame because I honestly believe that there's plenty of people in Russia that don't want this, but they're afraid. The irony is that like younger generation, if some of them don't have a choice, some of them have already escaped, right? They're not there anymore. They're in other parts of the world, including the United States, right? But as far as older generation, I don't understand how they don't see the parallels between Putin and what he's doing to the country and to silence the voices, to silence any kind of dissent, to silence the newspaper, the free media. There's no such thing right now in Russia, right? The things that he was doing with that and going back to the Stalin era. It's the same parallels. They're shutting down everything. During the time that Putin has been president, Ukraine had like five. But as somebody that's lived here for as long as I have and proud to be an American and proud to have Ukrainian heritage at the same time, right? I'm proud of both. But I don't understand why we're so afraid to give Ukraine, frankly, the weapons that it needs to stop this war. If Ukraine would have got F-16s a year ago, this would have been over by now. Instead, how much more money is this war going to cost? And it's costing it not because Ukrainians can't fight for themselves. There's not an American soldier on the ground. There's not a European soldier on the ground unless they volunteered to fight over there and they went over there of their own means. There's not a single like registered enlisted military man from another country fighting for Ukraine today. Not one, as far as I know. Putin picked the one country that would 100% fight back. And that country, Ukraine, it's fighting your war for you. It's fighting the war for Europe, who would be next. It's fighting the war for United States, who would have to support Europe. So I understand people, oh, it's so much money. Well, you know what? If you would have sent the weapons that Ukraine needed and sent them not when you finally decided to send it, but when they actually needed it, why did the current offensive stall? They still haven't got the planes. They still can't protect their own skies. You can't protect the skies. How many troops, how many young soldiers, how many guys in their 20s are dying at this war? That's Ukrainian future right there. If you gave Ukraine what they needed, this war would have been over by now. Instead, we're dragging our feet. I'm not putting all this on us here in US, but they're fighting your war. They're fighting for democracy. This is something that we should heavily support. Just by saying, oh, we support Ukraine and we're going to be around. That's great, but what are they going to fight this war with? If they had the if they were able to stop the bombings because they have the good planes, not the MiGs against an equivalent of an F-16, but F-16's equivalent against F-16, that's a different war.
Yeah. All these sound bites. We support this, we support that. It's also interesting that the two countries you're talking about are the two countries that chose to defend themselves and are totally willing and ongoingly committed to defending themselves. And as a result of that, lives are being lost on all sides. Innocent people and families are being destroyed on all sides because of some political bullshit
Yeah.
in both areas. It's so
And it
sad.
is political bullshit because there's relatives like the Ukraine and Russia has been intertwined. There's families on both sides.
Yeah. Yeah, Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Palestine,
Yeah.
everybody's suffering because
Yeah.
of this.
Trust me, the moment the Israeli situation happened, Putin went.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Now they're gonna send them weapons that they could have went to Ukraine instead. They supported Hamas. There were actually some of their, on air personalities that openly endorsed what's going on in Israel. They openly said this, and they're trying to align. They're trying to say basically like what? They're trying to say that Ukraine is Palestine and they're Israel? No,
Yeah.
that's not the case either. I'm not saying it's right, but at the same time, on the Israeli side, and once again, some people may crucify me for this, but on the Israeli side, the whole idea of settlements that are being pushed upon Palestinians all the time, that's not the right way either. That's not the right way either. Hamas needs to be destroyed so this never happens again. But Hamas is using simple people, they're using civilians as a shield, and there's nothing that they can do about it. Israel can't stop
Right.
because, yes, it's costing thousands of lives. It's horrible. But if they stop, sooner or later, Hamas is going to rebuild their strength and they're going to do this again and again and again and again. How long of that again and again has to happen? I've had conversations with Palestinians in US. I've had conversation with this guy from Egypt not that long ago. And the irony is this. They all say the same thing that I say. If civilians actually sat down and talk about this, they'd figure out a way. When politicians get involved, when military groups get involved, they're the ones that create what's going on right now.
Yeah, the other issue. Have you ever listened to the PBD podcast, Patrick Bet David?
I haven't.
It's pretty interesting. I listened to an episode with him and the Crown Prince of Iran.
Mhm.
Um, he's the
Right. You mentioned this before. I
yeah,
remember.
it's interesting. But when you think about like the how Hamas is being funded and the average citizen in Iran doesn't sound much different than the average citizen in Russia. Poor, disconnected.
Sure.
They're suffering just
Yeah.
as much. And then you think about the
Mhm.
population in Israel. I don't know the exact population. I want to say it's something like, this is probably wrong, 16 million Jews or something to that effect in Israel. Does that sound?
Maybe. Yeah.
And
Maybe.
then you look at the
Yeah, I mean, you got to keep in mind too. There's a constant misconception about Israel too. A lot of people assume that the ultra religious group in Israel is the majority. They're not.
Mhm.
I've been to Israel once in my life, and that's not the case. Yeah, there's a lot of synagogues, sure. I've been to a few places. I looked at a few things, but there's plenty of people
Right.
in Israel also.
Well,
So
and they're, the Palestinian population around Israel is significant,
2.5, something like that.
huge,
But
huge.
it's a very small. It's a lot of people being packed in a very small area. So that's the other thing is that because there's so many people packed in such a small area, and Hamas is hiding behind these people, unfortunately, civilian casualties are unavoidable.
Right. And then everyone
It
can,
sucks. It's
and
it's horrible, but it's unavoidable. It's not gonna, there's no way around it until Hamas is eradicated. It's not like the civilians are gonna make the Hamas to go, we give up, and then walk out of Israel and go to wherever, Iran or visit their friends in the Hezbollah or what have you.
right. Plus, they're
Keep
not
in
just
mind,
they're not just located there. They're
yeah,
located at other places too. So even if you
yeah,
eradicate them there, they're elsewhere as well.
right. Yeah.
So I mean, you know more than I do on this whole thing, but it's just
I
so
mean, on
interesting.
Israeli, I'm not there. I see what you see, but I'm also being subjective. I'm not. Once again, I support Israel's right to defend itself,
Yeah.
and it sucks that all these civilians had to die. But then, Israelis did not march into Palestine, murder, rape, and kill. The soldiers are there, yeah. Are the civilians in some cases getting away and getting killed? Yeah, but it's a different way. It's not what Hamas did when they walked in there. You can't compare the two. It's not comparable.
We covered more ground than I expected, Yuriy. I appreciate your time today. I don't want to end it because I'm learning as you're talking, but in order to
You might have to split this into two episodes.
I think I'm going to do that. This is very interesting, and I appreciate everything. And I wish you a great holiday season. And thank you for being on with me today.
Sure, it's a pleasure.